Good morning, Neil, Kelly. Huh? What questions you look
Well,
Introduce yourself.
I'm John Dikeou from Denver, Colorado. I own back when we had minor league baseball, I owned the Denver Zephyrs and bought them from Jerry Phipps back in 1984.
And what inspired you to buy the Bears?
Well, I wanted to try to bring Major League Baseball to Denver, and that would be a great vehicle to be able to do it, because you could talk to Major League owners. And my goal was to bring Major League Baseball to Denver, and the goal was you had access to Baseball Elite at that time if you could talk to the Major League players and talk to the Major League owners. And the Baseball Elite at that time was Peter Ueberroth, Commissioner of Baseball, Dr. Bobby Brown, President of the American League, Bill White, President of the National League. And I remember when I spoke to them they always told me that I always got the same message, that Denver wouldn't get a Major League Baseball team without a no seat tax and a baseball-only stadium. So I thought that a 1/10 of 1% sales tax would work at that time to finance the new stadium. And at that time, I talked with Robert Housen, our general manager and president, and we determined we needed some help. And that's when I went to my good friend Neil Macy, and Neil Macy helped me. Said he would help us. We needed some political help to get it on the ballot and sponsor the bill. And that time we went to Neil, and he said he'd help us. And then we followed up, and together we approached Kathy Williams at that time, and she agreed to sponsor the bill. And that was, I'm sure, very difficult for her, because no one wants to be associated with a $100 million tax increase. It could kill their political career immediately. But she went to bat for us, and she did a great job, and she got the bill passed. And then became really then a vote, and that came a community effort. And back then we were able to get the support of the Denver Post, the Rocky Mountain News, the TV stations, the radio stations, the mayor, the governor, the baseball commission. Great help from the baseball commission was Neil Macy and Roger Kinney and Joe Blake, and it was a close vote. We won, and as a result we have Coors Field and the Colorado Rockies. But that's kind of a summarize of what happened in a short
Yeah,
brief.
so going back to the Bears, so you started owning the Bears in '84?
Right, I wrote Jerry Phipps a letter back in about, I think it was 82, 83, and he had just sold the Bears to Edgar Kaiser, and he said he did not want to...
The Broncos.
The Broncos, excuse me, the Broncos, not the Bears. Just sold the Broncos to Edward Kaiser, and he said he didn't want to sell the Bears at that time. About a year later, I wrote him another letter, and he said, come on down to his office, and I told him I would. And the night before, he called up and said his wife Janet was sick, and he said, come over to my house in Bell Carroll's. So I always got nervous in those things, because you never knew if you said something wrong and the Phipps said something wrong, everyone was going to be with the Phippses. You're not going to win. So I took my brother George with me, and he said he doesn't want to sell the team. I don't know why we're going down there to his home. What if he asks for a lot of money? What are we going to do? And I said, well, let's see what he does. And so we went down there to his home in Bell Carroll, and a butler greets us at the door. And I remember my brother George said, what are we doing here? So we go in, and Gerald comes in, and we're talking about baseball and things, and I asked him, well, what would he want for the team? He told us what he wanted for the team. It was a little high, but I accepted it. And he said he wanted to do two things: work out the lease with the city for the Denver Bears, and also work out the minor league contract with the Denver Bears that he was in the middle of at that time. And he thought that would work out fine. And I said, I I said, that'd be fine. Well, he said, it'll take 2 weeks. About 2 months went by, and I remember my brother George came in the office one day and he said, what do you think happened to the deal? And I said, I don't know what happened to the deal. I said, but let's just wait. Sometimes it takes a little longer at the city and things to get things done. And about a few days later, he called me and he said, we got a deal. We closed the deal. And I remember maybe we did pay too much money, because I remember at closing, Jerry Phipps sat there and he said, after the closing, he said, well, John, I left $300,000 in the checking. I said, 300? And you're signing the documents at that time, you don't know what to say, you just keep signing. I said, thank you. I said, I appreciate it. So I think maybe we paid a little too much at the time, and he gave us back $300,000 at closing, the gentleman he was. But
That was nice.
which was very nice, as
Yeah.
you say. That was very, very nice. So that's how we got basically involved in baseball.
So then you hired Robert Housen to,
Then I hired, the first year I had Tony Citarella, and he was our general manager, and then we brought Robert Housen in the second year that we owned the team.
how did you know about Robert?
I lived next to his family when we grew up. I lived on 2nd and Ash, and they lived 2 doors down on 150 Ash, and I knew his father, and the Housens were, everyone knew, since they owned the Bears back then. That was in the late 40s, and Robert Housen's father-in-law was Governor Ed C. Johnson at that time, and Robert Housen told me a lot of stories about the governor, and I remember one time he was talking about Robert, was telling me about Mr. Hunt, Lamar Hunt. He said, he slept in my bed. And I said, what do you mean? He said when he was trying to get the football franchise, the Denver Broncos at that time, and they were trying to start the AFC, he came and tried to get my dad, who was basically the owner of the Broncos, the first owner at that time, and he said he stayed at our house, and my dad told me I had to sleep in the basement and let Lamar Hunt sleep in my bed. He sat upstairs.
Wow.
There you go.
But that's how I met the Housens.
Yeah, okay, so then it had been named the Bears for years and years and years. So how did you make the transition to the Zephyrs?
Well, we went to the Zephyrs. When we couldn't buy the team from the Phippses, I made up a team, just kind of a team that wasn't a team. And we said we wanted to bring Major League Baseball to Denver at that time, and we called it the Zephyrs. And that's how we basically, when we bought the Bears, we changed the name to the Zephyrs, because we had already changed the name before, the year before is when we got in, when when Jerry Phipps said he wouldn't sell us the team. He sold it to Edgar Kaiser when he sold it, the Broncos, I should say.
So once you own that, that gave you the ability to go to the winter meetings and
It gave you got to go all the winter meetings and talk to Peter Ubroff, later to Bart Giamatti and Fay Vincent, and those people. And they'd always tell you the same thing. They talk to you about baseball and things. And I said, well, how do we look for Denver? And that was early. He said, well, you got a few years, and you knew. And then when it came closer, Bart Giamatti invited me back to New York. And Fay Vincent was there, and they said to me, John, you kept asking us, and we thought we'd give you the respect to let you know that we are going to expand. And you're not going to get a team if you think we're going to play in a football stadium. And if you want to have Denver have a chance, he said, you better have a baseball-only stadium. And that's when I got different people involved, and as I mentioned earlier to you, that we got basically Neil Macy and Kathy Williams were the driving forces to basically promote that. It was tough, but we got it done.
So that was in '86 and '87 that they told you that?
I think they probably told me probably in about '87, I'd say. I'd have to, it's so long time ago, time has passed so many years, but I'd say about '87. They gave me about 6 months to a year in advance, maybe not quite a year. Then when they called you back to New York, you knew something was up. They aren't gonna
course.
gave you the respect to call you back and tell you what was going to go on. And he said, and I said, what other cities have you mentioned it? They said, we have told some other cities, but there's not that many cities we think that'll really have a chance. But I think it was Phoenix, probably Miami, St. Petersburg, who built a stadium and did not get a team at that time. So, I mean, you know,
Washington D.C., weren't they?
and Washington, D.C. was another city, you're correct. There were, you know, 5 or 6 cities that had good possibilities of getting the franchise.
So, John, even earlier on, way back when Marvin Davis lived in Colorado and he had made a run at the Padres, I think.
The Oakland A's.
The Oakland A's. So did you have any involvement at that particular time, or you're just watching to see what was happening, or?
No, I knew Marvin real well because, like, my father was on his bank board, Metropolitan National Bank. My dad was, when he first started the bank back in the early 60s, my dad was one of the 5 directors when they first started Metropolitan National Bank, so I knew him well. And he thought he did have the team back in, I think it was 1976. And he bought the team from Charles Finley at that time, but Charles Finley was going through a divorce and they weren't sure who owned the team, whether his wife had control of the team or whether he did, so he didn't really have the ownership. And that time I think he hired, I'd have to check him and find out if it's, but I think he hired Al Rosen, the great baseball player for the Cleveland Indians, to come out here and be the general manager at that time, because he thought he did have a deal to close the deal with Oakland A's.
So one of the other things is that I know one of the reasons that Colorado was pursuing an existing team is because at that time Major League Baseball had not indicated that they were going to expand, and that Tim Wirth and Congressman Schaefer decided to hold some antitrust hearings. Were you aware of anything having to do with those hearings?
I did know about him through Robert's dad, Bob Howsam, because he was involved in baseball and would keep us in touch with that, and that is true. And that, you know, they were saying anti-hearings, they were trying to, I think, get expansion. It probably did help them a little, but baseball moves at such a slow rate that, you know, no one pays, you know, they have a meeting and then they'll meet in the summer and you have to go to the different meetings. But I remember Bob Lorry, who owned the San Francisco Giants, you know, I was good friends with him, and he would keep me in touch with what was going on. I'd go out and see him. And as you go out to see these different people, when I owned the Zephyrs, you did have a chance to get closer to them, and they would confide in you more and things. And I said, well, do you ever get to Denver? He said, well, I fly over it a lot. He said, yeah, I remember, because they had interest in Chicago and things, but he was. And aside that, back in, when we first bought the Bears, the person who was selling his team was, I'm trying to think of his name now, Pittsburgh Pirate, Dan Galbraith. And Dan Galbraith, I remember, said, do you want to buy the team, John? And it was, I think, for $34 million at that time,
Wow.
back in '84. And he says, so I said, no, I think we really want to try to see if we can get expansion. We won't be able to move it. They just had bought, they had just had a new stadium built and had a lease to 2011, as I remember. And so you weren't going to be able to move the team here for all those years. So I remember one time I'm come down to my office down on 18th and Welton, and there's Channel 4 there, and I'm saying, what is Channel 4 doing here in front of my office? And I'm going there, and they said, we hear that we just talked to Dan Galbraith, and he said he thinks you're buying, that you may be interested in, you're going to buy the Pittsburgh Pirates and move them to Denver.
Oh, wow.
And I said, no, that's not true. And I called up Dan Galbraith, and Dan Galbraith said, did they really come down to your office? I said, yes, they did. He said, God, I said, I'm sorry. He said, John, they keep trying to put pressure on me here. I'm trying to sell the team. He said, we don't have any offers, to be honest with you. You know, they keep telling us we got all these offers to sell the team, but we have nobody. And he said, I just threw out your name. He said, I'm sorry, but that's kind of a sidebar, interesting story.
That is interesting.
But,
So one of the things Federico told us is that it appeared that several teams were acting like they had interest in Denver, but were just using us to negotiate better leases with their...
that's true. The Chicago White Sox were a prime example. Minnesota, they all wanted new stadiums. And to get a new stadium, Federico is absolutely correct. To get a new stadium, they said, we're going to move our franchise to Denver. But they really, I think Federico, I don't know what he said, but I think he would agree that they really weren't going to move. But it's just a pressure point to get them to get stadium. And it worked in many cases. It worked, I think, for the White Sox. They ended up getting Comiskey Park eventually. And I think it worked for the Humphrey Dome when they built the Humphrey Dome eventually. That helped them at that time. And I can't remember other cities, but they were all trying to get new stadiums. I think even Bob Lorry out in San Francisco was pushing that. And I think Bob Lorry even came out here one time with Federico and said, I'm thinking about it, but he wasn't going to move.
Well, I think that's kind of what Federico was intimating, is that we felt like we were being leveraged, but you couldn't not meet with them and talk to them about it, or meet with them if they came to Denver.
I think you're right. I think, you know, it might be only a 5% chance, but you've got to take that 5% chance, and you've got to try to cooperate, because these are the people later that are going to be voting whether Denver is going to get a franchise. So if you're not cooperating with them, well, you're not going to have how should I say, you're not going to have a chance to get a franchise.
Yeah, so you buy the Bears, and that's about the same time that Federico set up the Denver Baseball Commission.
Well, I think he did. I think maybe it was a little later at that time. I think they had, and that's one of the reasons, I think you're right, Neil, that we did have that, Federico did set up the Baseball Commission. That's one reason, because they really wouldn't talk to, you know, you could go to the winter meeting, they'd have 15 people, 15 cities, we're going to expand. Yes, we know where you're interested. Or Vancouver, are you was there, I remember, and they'd say, you have a chance. Everyone has a chance. That's why I tried to buy, when I bought the Bears, was to try to, in owning this efforts, was try to get one-on-one with the different owners. Because I felt, I probably met, I think at that time there was maybe, I can't remember, 30 owners, 28 owners at that time. I probably met with probably 15 or 20 of them at that time, personally, from Ewing Kaufman and the Griffiths in Minnesota, and Bob Lorry, Dan Galbraith, and many others.
Did you work with them at the meetings at Denver?
Well, you went and talked to them. You went to World Series, and when you went to the World Series, you got to go to the major league parties, and you got to hobnob or whatever you want to do and talk with them and say, you know, don't forget us out here. And I think they get tired. We know, John, do you have a stadium? We've told you what we want. We gave you the message. Are you going to build a stadium or not? You know, so, but you couldn't put, you know, they're having their things. You just try to show up at different events, World Series, All-Star games, winter meetings, go to their offices. Like I went out to Ewing Kaufman's office, I remember, in Kansas City. An interesting story. I remember you walked in, and Marion was the name of his company, Marion Industries, and he had, as you waited out there in the lobby, he had what the stock was selling for that day. Every day they would change the stock, what the Marion stock was selling for. But you know, I felt that if you went out and saw these owners one-on-one and took the time to go out there and show that much interest, you know, what was going on, it meant a lot more to them rather than just saying hello to them at a winter meeting and things, or around 15 people and they can't remember one person from the other than they were from Vancouver. Just like, it's hard to, when there's 15 people in a room to remember everybody, and they've got their assistants, and there's mayors there, and there's everyone that you can think of. Yeah,
So the legislation passed, the voters approved it in the fall of 1990. Was it August of 90? And did you talk to Major League Baseball right after that and let them know? Or?
Well, at that time, when I spoke to Bart Giamatti, and he had told me, then he passed away right after that, really.
Right.
And he said, he kind of indicated Denver was going to get the franchise if we had a stadium. And that's why they called me out there. Are you going to get the stadium? So back then, I think the baseball commission, probably I had done the work that I could have done. I think the baseball commission and people were able, like Federer, the mayor Pena could talk to them, and everyone. And then I think every city was trying to put their best foot on and send everyone that they knew some owner to see if they would get the vote. But I think baseball, in my opinion, back then, had really made up their minds who was going to get the franchise. And I think it came down to Phoenix at that time. Mr. Stone owned the team, and he lived on the East Coast. And he owned the minor league team, and there wasn't that much interest, even though Jerry Colangelo later got involved in it. He at that time wasn't, Phoenix didn't push. It was the two Florida cities that I recall, maybe an outside chance with Washington, in Denver, and whoever was going to get the stadium. And then when we did get the stadium, I think it was a lock that we were going to get a franchise. They weren't going to give two to Florida. And then what they did, they kind of took Miami over St. Petersburg because it was a lot larger city, and I think they thought it would be a better success.
Well, from what we understand from one of the other interviewees, I think it was Paul Jacobs, who said that Tampa St. Pete had built a stadium, it was sitting there vacant, that if Tampa St. Pete was kind of used in one of these leverage deals, if you build a stadium, we'll move one of the existing owners would move the team to Tampa St. Petersburg. And then when that didn't happen, that particular owner then was really carrying a torch for Tampa St. Petersburg.
That was the White Sox, yeah.
Was it the White Sox?
Yeah.
And so, did you know anything about that?
Well, the White Sox, I think, were the team. All of them, as we were talking about earlier, tried to use leverage, you know what I mean, to get a better position to where they were. I don't think anyone was going to move to St. Pete, at that time, in my opinion.
Yes.
I think St. Pete had a try, and I think they had their best chance was when there was going to be an expansion team. But you'd have to go way back, and I don't know, when Seattle had a team, and I think they moved. Danny Kaye, the actor, owned the team at that time, I think, or was a big owner, and they failed up in Seattle. And I think they went, I can't remember, I was thinking Milwaukee, but it might not have been Milwaukee first, and then the Braves came up. But they moved, and the city of Seattle was going to sue Major League Baseball, which you mentioned earlier with the antitrust and all that.
Right.
And they end up getting a baseball team. They end up getting another expansion team at that time, because I think they didn't want to go through the antitrust and things. So I think it's very difficult for a city to move, like what Paul was saying. Maybe they'll use that and say they are, but when it gets right down to it, it's very difficult to move to a city that has a team.
Well, I think because of the Tampa St. Petersburg experience, we had decided in crafting the legislation that we weren't going to build a stadium. We put in there, if you award us a franchise, we will build a stadium. And I'm kind of interested in what you kind of felt about the legislative experience of going down to the legislature. I know Sam Simplicio had indicated to me at one time that he felt some legislators were extremely rude to him and very disrespectful. What do you kind of feel your experience with the Colorado legislature was?
I think a lot of them were, I don't think they were disrespectful. I wouldn't say that. I think that a lot of them didn't want a stadium, didn't want the city to pay, didn't want the taxpayers, didn't want to be involved in anything that was going to cost a taxpayer a tax. And that's what I think when Kathy Williams went ahead and took a lot of guts to really to sponsor the bill and put it on the ballot. When you talk about $100 million, people jump out of their seats, but I think most of them were kind of friendly. I remember Terry Considine was one that tried to help us a lot, and Paulson, and there were people that were there. You're always going to have people against something like that, but I don't think they were rude to me. No, I would say no.
So one of the arguments that I got from one of my colleagues who ultimately became governor, Bill Owens, said that, this is a profit-making venture, that, why are we going to subsidize a rich person's business? Did you get any pushback that, John, because you own the team, you should be building the stadium?
Well, as people would say, I think we might have had some people say, well, you're the one that's going to make all the money. Why don't you help in some way? And at that time, I said, and you probably have a better chance today because you have the luxury boxes that you can charge a tremendous amount of money to do. But back then in the 80s, baseball wasn't, a real moneymaker when you go back. You take just 10 years earlier, George Steinbrenner bought the New York Yankees, and he only paid $12 million from CBS back then. So you
wow.
and you got to realize back in, and that's only 10, say 10, 15 years earlier, which is a snap of the fingers when you think about it. In baseball, people made money, but you could, just as I mentioned earlier, Dan Galbraith was selling his franchise for $34 million. Now they're going for, who knows, $700 million or higher.
I think Neil knows, what was the last number that the Rockies were estimated to be worth?
850.
Yeah, so it's a
different deal.
It's but back then, but they've got the TV contracts now that pay millions and millions of dollars, and they will go up. They will continue to go up because of these different companies that are getting involved in it, like Amazon and things that are starting to. I think they're going to be the new Fox. What Fox was when Rupert Murdoch came in and started outbidding CBS and those things for NFL franchise, games and things. And I think Amazon and these new companies are going to do the same thing.
So when we got the stadium passed and we were waiting to hear from Major League, did you get any confidential phone calls or notices? When did you find out that we were going to get a team?
Tal Smith told me that we were going to get a team.
And when did he tell you that?
I had no doubt we were going to get the team after I spoke to Bart Giamatti and I talked to Tal Smith, and then when we got the stadium passed, or the bill passed, that was the key. I knew we wouldn't get a team if we didn't get a stadium, and if we got a team, we would get a stadium. I mean, I didn't feel like I had to talk to them, but I think I knew through Tal Smith and the different people that you talk to, and I still was going to World Series game, and they can't come out and tell you, you got the team, because they don't know if you're going to go to the Denver Post or something and say something, They say, well, it looks good for you, But I think the groundwork, so many people have done so much groundwork. And Denver was an ideal spot when you think about it. Denver and Phoenix, I think, were the two ideal spots. Miami just never really caught on with baseball. Still today, they don't get big crowds down there. And you take the history of Denver, we were getting 16, 17,000 in 1948 when Bob Howsam built the Bears Stadium back in the late 40s, which was, they'd say, God, the #1 minor league franchise in the country. And that's when they tried to build the Continental League, and Robert Howsam, or Bob Howsam, was involved in it at that time, and they didn't get it. And the only two teams that Branch Rickey put in the Continental League that didn't get a team was Buffalo and Denver. They didn't get a major league franchise that was in the Continental League when they expanded. And today Denver does have a team, Buffalo doesn't. But.
So my memory may be foggy on this, but one of the things that we designated in the bill, we didn't want to designate a single site because then people start picking apart the site. So we put that the Stadium Authority would narrow it down to 3 sites before the election, and then everybody could have something that they loved. It seems to me that one of the sites, was it property that you owned off of like 23rd and something?
We did one, the stadium. I thought it would be, uptown would be better up on 23rd, but the closest property we had from 23rd was, we had a piece of property, I think it was just a small parking lot on 20th and Weldon. So we were 3 blocks away from, and it was more in the 5 Points area that we thought that, and we weren't against where it went down there in Lodo, I think, but we did want it downtown. Some people wanted it on I-25, and other people were talking about I-70 and things, and but we did want it downtown, that's for sure.
And so you've kind of answered what you think about the location today. What do you think? Do you think it's helped redevelop that area, or do you think it's stifled that area?
I think baseball rejuvenated the whole town of downtown Denver. If you ask me, I mean, really, not even Lodo down there, but I think everywhere. I mean, it was the right spot, and I think we weren't the first city to go downtown. I think they did it in Baltimore and places, but you notice throughout the country, minor league or major league, they all want to go downtown now, because I think it does help cities, downtown area. I think it helps tremendously in the business.
Well, I know one of the things is Federico Pena came to me and said that we needed to designate in the bill that it would be a Denver site, and I'm telling him that that would be the kiss of death from the other counties within the district may not support it as much as if we, I said more than likely it's going to be in Denver because Denver has the infrastructure and other communities aren't going to want to invest in that. And subsequently, Federico became the cabinet person for the Department of Transportation and was able to put in the big viaduct that kind of helps the traffic flow
20th.
in and out of where the stadium is.
Well, I think, Kathy, I think you're right. It's a good thing you were sponsoring the bill, because that is important. Because whether you wanted it in Denver or not, if you didn't give everyone an equal chance, they're going to vote against you. You're right. You're 100% correct in that assessment.
So you have the ownership of the Zephyrs, and then we got designated for the team. Why weren't you more involved in the ownership of the major league team? Well,
at that time, we could have been. I talked to John Antonucci, and he wanted us to be involved. And it seemed to me that there were so many owners that they would have a problem. But we stepped aside, and we're just going to sell our minor league territorial rights to the Rockies.
So you thought about getting in with?
We did think about
getting.
Okay. He wanted us to put in the Zephyrs as equity, and they were trying to get different people throughout the city, I think, if you recall, to be partners.
Are you happy you didn't do that, or sad?
Well, it looks like it would have been a good investment. So you never know. It would have been a very good investment, money-wise, no question. And I tell you, owning a team, when I owned the Denver Zephyrs, it's a lot of fun. You get to go to the exhibition. We put on exhibition games. We got to develop minor league players. A lot of great players came through here. Paul O'Neill, Gary Sheffield, Barry Larkin. that became huge major league stars when you look back. And you got to know them personally, you know, being here in Denver, and it was fun. I remember we talked earlier about Sam Simplesio. He said, "There's nothing better than being in baseball." He used to tell me, you know, and even John McHale said, "There's baseball. It's you enjoy it, you make money." And he said, if you like that, I didn't like that much. If you like to be in the limelight, he says, you can't be anything better than in sports.
Well, John, it's very obvious that you have a true love of sports, and especially baseball. How did you come to have that kind of a feeling about baseball?
I tell you what, baseball, I did all kinds of sports when I grew up, but baseball, I remember when the Denver Bears first came. They played out at Merchants Park, and I remember I was probably 11 years old or so, and I had friends in the neighborhood, and we used to take the streetcar down there, down to Merchants Park, and they watched the ball games, come back on the 5 streetcar. And I remember one time, I think we had 16 games in a row, and we're on the streetcar, and I'm talking to an older gentleman there as you're standing. Everyone's in the streetcar conductors ringing the bell and screaming and yelling, "We're going to go win 20, 25. I said to him, "Man, how much are we going to win?" And he said, "I think we'll win 26 straight." And that was like another 7, 8 more games. And I remember listening to the radio the next day that we went down and played a doubleheader down in Pueblo. We lost 18-4 after winning 16 straight.
So Merchants Park was on South Broadway?
South Broadway, I don't know if they tore down the building about, I think 10, 15 years ago. Montgomery Wards, it was just south of Montgomery Wards. And you'd go there and you're young, and people would tell you stories. They sat there and say, "Well, Babe Ruth came here, you know, and you know, he hit a home run, hit the 7th floor of Montgomery Wards." And you say, "Yeah, you believed it," but when you think back, it had to go 3,000 feet. But you believed it when you're 10 years old.
So one of the other things that Paul Jacobs told us, that when Mickey Monas got into his legal trouble, that he had a meeting with Paul Jacobs and John Antonucci indicating that he was going to have to, that he was no longer going to be acceptable to baseball. So Paul Jacobs tells us that he signed a personal note for $20 million and that he had to go out and find some ownership to replace. Were you asked to come back into the ownership possibility at that time?
They wanted us to put in, John Antonucci and them, we met, and he wanted us to put in as collateral the Denver Zephyrs. You know, they were going to have to pay us for the territorial rights in for the franchise, or you did not for the franchise. You could move the franchise, but they had to pay you for the territorial rights. And he asked if we wanted to put in our territorial rights as equity into the Colorado Rockies, which we said no.
So we get designated. You were at the opening day at the old Mile High Stadium.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
It was good. I mean, I've never seen so many people and so many excited people to be at a stadium. And then when Eric Young hit the home run, I mean, you thought that there wasn't a roof. It would have been a roof on that stadium in order to come off. It had been blown off.
The heavens opened up
It
that
did.
day.
It did. It did. We played, I think it was the Mets that day. It was a lot of fun. Baseball's a lot of fun. There's a lot of things. And we've got a great chance this year, I think. We'll be in the wild card position 2017. And we win that game, who knows what can happen.
Well, it appears that baseball might be changing a bit. I think when Neil and I go to Coors Field, we're kind of shocked. We'll go up to the party deck that is now part of the stadium, and it appears there's a lot of young people there partying and have no idea who's playing or what the score is. What do you think about those kinds of changes in baseball?
I think it happened when we moved the team to New Orleans. We kept the team for a few years, and then they built a stadium. And at that time, Kathy, the same thing was happening. This was back then. They had in right field, they had a swimming pool. They built a swimming pool. They built a stadium and a swimming pool and other activities throughout. people would go out there, go swimming, come in the third inning, and come watch a game, and go back out in the seventh inning, and do something else. So I think that's kind of, I don't think it's going to get that way in Major League Baseball. But minor leagues, you're just there to entertain the different people.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah. John McHale said that, we were talking about that deck, and he said that there's a bunch of teams kind of looking at what was done here in Denver with that deck, and they might be doing similar things.
Well, I'm sure it is, because people don't. You can get all the people. Denver's got one of the big things that Denver has that other cities don't have is the climate. You go to the Midwest in back in the 30s and 40s, or I should say the 50s, 60s, to try to get women to come to a baseball game because of the humidity and things in their face with the makeup and things. They didn't want to go. Denver, that's not a problem. You know, there's more women there than there is men, and it's changed. But you're there to entertain, and how can you get people to come back? Because you make so much money on the hot dogs. I think I remember ARA had our franchise, so we didn't get any concession money when we bought the Bears from the Phippses. ARA had it. But I remember talking to the people at ARA, and they wouldn't sell hot dogs then like they do at the major leagues for $6, $7, but we get $2, $2.50. But it only cost them with 6.5 cents, I think, for the hot dog, and 10 cents for the bun or something. I mean, and so they're making almost 100% profit when you look back at that. I mean, it's big money. So if you can get them there and they come back and they have a good experience, they'll come back. So the more activities you have, like a swimming pool or a bar and things, that they'll do. And a lot of them, I think, if you notice up there, I was talking to, who was I talking to? Said a lot of them they'll have a few drinks at a local bar in the area, like happy hour, get 2 for 1, and then go up there because they want to meet some girls, or the girls want to meet their boys, and they maybe only have 1 or 2 drinks, but they want to be there. They want to be there because it's exactly. It's the place to be.
You understand downtown as well as anyone. What kind of impact did the stadium have on the development of downtown?
I said earlier, I think it redeveloped downtown. I think downtown in the 80s, when the Canadians came with oil, it went down. In the 90s, it was moving slowly. But I think the baseball stadium developed so many areas. From the Highlands across the Viaduct to Union Station. I think it was one that propelled Union Station. I think it's now propelling uptown, downtown, at the Arapahoe Square development over there. Every area, every area has benefited from baseball, having the stadium there. I think tremendously. I don't think people realize how much it benefited. I mean, you got to realize back then it was the slums down there on 20th and Larimer and things. I mean, slums. Now people, they couldn't rent a store. Now they can lease bars and get $30, $40 a square foot. I mean, it's big money.
Well, I know one of the objections that I heard doing a radio show where people would call in. I mean, 2 of the things I heard was, this is a football town. It will never support baseball. And you're going to build a white elephant and nobody is going to come. The other is you're going to displace all of those homeless people. They won't have any place to live.
Well, I think homeless people and people that have drug problems and things, they always find a new area. It used to be Larimer Square. All they did with the drug and alcoholic people moving from Larimer Square to Colfax. You know, they always find some place to go. Huh?
True. So any final thoughts on the whole process?
Stories you'd like to tell us?
No, I think it was a great thing. I'm happy that I was involved in it and try to do a little that I could to help bring Major League Baseball here. And I think it's one of the best things that ever happened to Denver.
Well, I think, John, at least from my perspective, you know, your part of the relay race was keeping the dream alive. and assessing that we needed a stadium and getting the ball rolling as far as getting a stadium. And I mean, without that, without the good start, we certainly wouldn't have Major League Baseball today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, but it was a lot of fun doing it. I'll tell you.
Yeah, and what were you inducted into a couple of years ago?
Just for bringing baseball to Colorado in the region, I was fortunate enough to be inducted in the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame, which is a great honor, and I really appreciate it.
Well, we really appreciate you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.